Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm Gino Reda. I have spent over 4 decades working in the game, fortunate enough to meet some of the great legends of the game, saw them come into the league, watched them shine in the game, and now they've moved on to life after hockey. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, relive some great memories, and hear what they're up to today. Today's guest, 18-year NHL veteran who's part of the legendary Sutter family from Viking, Alberta, 2-time Stanley Cup champion, 3-time Canada Cup champion. He coached the New Jersey Devils and Calgary Flames, also had a key role in Canadian junior hockey, both at the international level and the CHL level, won a Memorial Cup in 2001, and, of course, 2 gold medals at the World Juniors. Pleased to welcome my buddy Brent Sutter. Brent, great to have you on, my friend. I look forward to reminiscing some great stories, some great times we've had together.
Hey, Gino, good to be on, Bill.
I got to take you back for one of the first times I spent an extended period of time with you was the World Junior Hockey Championship 2005, Grand Forks, North Dakota. The coldest I have ever been in my entire life. Do you remember how cold it was there?
Well, in midday when it should be the warmest, it was minus 50. And I remember we had these parkas on and they had the fur in front of them, and you just pull a parka in front of your face when you're going from your bus or vehicle to the rink. It was extremely cold. Yeah. You know what? A good story with that, Gina. After the tournament was over, we left and went back to Winnipeg so everybody could fly out from Winnipeg the next day. We got on, they had a red bus for us, and we got on, I don't know, maybe with just luck of the draw, we're red representing Canada or whatever, but we're driving back to Winnipeg and it's minus 65 and our heater and defrost went out of the bus. So the coaches were standing up at the bus with the bus driver, and the bus driver had a bottle of whiskey, but none of us would drink.
Yeah.
And so we're pouring the bottle of whiskey on a rag and wiping the window down in front of him so he could see all the way to Winnipeg.
That's hilarious. That's the most expensive windshield washer fluid I've ever heard of, brother.
It's crazy. I don't know if it was Crown Royal, what it was, but geez. Yeah, it was cold.
What a collection. Like, for the people who don't remember that team, that's, I don't know, was it the greatest World Junior team ever? I mean, that was Bergeron and Crosby, and I mean, the list went on and on and on. What are your recollections of the talent? You played for some amazing teams. You played in Canada Cups with some of the great legends of all time. But in terms of coaching, do you ever remember a single group that talented that you ever got to coach?
Well, that year was the year of the lockout. And so, you know, if you look back at that team, there probably could have been 7 or 8 players would have played in the NHL that we wouldn't have had there. And that's how talented of a group we had. That age group was exceptional. You know, it was the 85 age group. And, you know, we got Patrice back, Bergeron back from the American Hockey League, came back and played. And that just kind of solidified it all, just with his character and his leadership and the type of player he was. And obviously Sidney was 17 at the time, and he was a great at that point in time of Sidney. Obviously Sidney has turned out to be, you know, one of the best players of all time in the NHL and an awesome human being. But Bergeron and Sidney we put together at that time in 07 or 05, and every international tournament or games they played with one another on the same team, they played together from that point on. And it was amazing team. You know, we knew, you know, Corey Perry, Ryan Getzlaf, you know, you look at, and the list goes on, right? Like there's so many, I'm just naming a few, like I could go through. I mean, I don't know how many of those players played in that team, but there was a lot that ended up being stars on their own teams in the National Hockey League and played for some big money in the NHL. So it was a group that certainly was elite. I guess it's up for question whether it was greatest of all time, but when you look at that group, I don't know how you can't sit there and, you know, put it right at the top.
It was amazing. Just an incredible experience in that barn. It was close enough to Winnipeg, as you mentioned. We all drove down from Winnipeg. but it was close enough for Winnipeg that the fans were able to make the drive down, and packed house every single game. It was just crazy. And
we were supposed to play in another pool. Our pool played in the other rink, and that was a 45-minute drive away from Grand Forks. That's where our pool was supposed to be played, but because of the attendance, they wanted us playing all our games in the big facility. So the teams, when they had play us in our group, had to come back into Grand Forks to play us in Grand Forks.
You're a guy who understood cold weather as a kid growing up. You grew up in Viking, Alberta, 7 boys, the Sutter family, on a little farming community. You guys ended up dressing for almost 5,000 NHL games. 5,000 NHL games. Amongst you and your brothers, you lifted the Stanley Cup 6 different times. Are there times in your head where you kind of go, I know you experienced it personally, but are there times in your head go, I can't believe that us as brothers went through all that we did?
Well, actually with Daryl's 2 Stanley Cups as a coach, it was 8. And when you go through it all, look back, you compare the standards today as far as facilities and everything that to back then, it's crazy. But we learned basically to be truthful, and this is no BS. We learned to play the game on the slough, and we skated as soon as the sloughs got hard enough, and we were out there every
Explain
day.
what that is. Sorry for our listeners who don't know.
Well, it's like a pond or a pool of water out in the middle of the field, and we'd have 3 or 4 different spots that we'd always rotate to on the farm, because maybe one spot the ice obviously it wasn't good enough. We moved to another place, and another pond, and and we never had nets. Like we made nets out of 2x4s and plywood, or we just used rubber boots or our winter boots, whatever. And our benches to put our skates on and stuff like that, and we went out and played, was a bale of straw or hay. And part of it was because we live 7 miles from town, and we played on natural ice to start with, not artificial ice. So the ice never went in till around the 1st of November. And it was always out by the end of March. So you only played 5 months, really, to be truthful, inside your rink. And that's if you didn't have a Chinook come in and melt your ice on you. But, it was, and we were the only league or only town in our league that had an indoor facility. Everybody else's was outdoors, so we'd have to go there and play them, and then we'd have to help the team we're playing shovel the snow off the ice so we could play the game. But yeah, it was. But you know what? I think that's all part of, as you look back on it, all part of forming character, in understanding. Obviously when they talk about love of the game, that truly was what love of the game all the kids did back then. Basically the grassroots of hockey back then was it was tough, so it was what it was, and you made the most of it.
You certainly did. The fact that you had that many brothers make it to the NHL, the fact that you guys came from such humble beginnings, the fact that you learned how to skate just on the farm with boots as a net. All of it is just insane. It's just crazy. There was the 7 boys, and let me list them for you. And I wrote them down because I'll never remember. Had a chance to work with all of you over the years, except for your older brother, Gary. I've never met Gary. Gary was the one who stayed back on the farm and ran the farm. He was the oldest. Then there was Brian, Daryl, Dwayne, you, the twins, Ronnie and Richie. You guys, the 6 guys, 7 years apart. Yeah. I can't imagine what that was like. I'm going to talk about your brothers in a second, the other guys' brothers in a second, but let's talk about Gary first, because I hear a couple of things about him, and I just want to confirm this. Was he the best hockey player potentially amongst the entire group of you? Because I've heard that from a number of you guys.
Well, Gary, he could play any position outside of goalie. I mean, he was as good of a defenseman he was a forward. He was smart. He could skate. He had a switch to him where he could absolutely snap on the ice too. Yeah, he had that part of his game. Guess as far as the whole element of his game, it was all there. And he certainly was a good enough, obviously, to move on. But he made a decision at 16 years of age. He could have went on to Red Deer and played in Red Deer too, where we all first started playing junior hockey, and yet he decided he was not going to do that. And back then, who would ever known, right? Like that they would move on, and 6 of us other youngest ones would move on and play professional hockey, and yet he made that decision at that point in time, and you got to respect that.
Fact or fiction? Did he really win the lottery?
Fact.
Come on, that's insane to me. So seven Sutter brothers, 6 of them make the NHL, and the one guy who doesn't make the NHL wins the lottery. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, him and his significant other were they were living in Kelowna, and they're working at a lumber company, or I don't know if it was a Home Hardware at the time or not, where they were working. And she worked in the inside, and Gary worked in the yard and the outside. And I guess after work one night, there was 4 couples that all knew each other. They were going out for dinner, and on the way there, they decided that they would buy a ticket, and they bought some lotto tickets, and they ended up winning the BC Lotto. So,
and how much did they win?
I think they all ended up with like about 1.5 each or something like that. So yeah, it was well, as far as couples, I think it was right around that $6.5 or $7 million, but it doesn't matter. It was significant. Just the fact that you think the odds of winning that, we all hope and wish we could, but we know what the odds are. It's never going to happen. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. I'll take you back to your childhood for a second. I mean, the Sutters weren't the only ones that were playing in Alberta at that point. When you were a 15-year-old, you were playing for Red Deer with your brother Dwayne, and you were playing against the 16-year-old who ended up doing okay on his own, playing the NHL, a Stanley Cup champion and Hockey Hall of Famer. Tell me the story about that, and tell me about the specific playoff series that, well, you tell the story about when all hell broke loose with this kid.
Well, Mark, we're obviously talking about Mess, right? And Mark played for St. Albert. Doug, his dad, coached the team. That actually they started with the Spruce Grove Mets, and then they moved into St. Albert. But when I started in the league as a 15-year-old, Mark was a 16-year-old at that time, and he was obviously, Mark played the year before as a 15-year-old, was a standout in the league, and then he was there as a 16-year-old. And everyone knows what happened to him at 17. He ends up playing down in the WHA. So that's how big of a, how good of a player he was. But yeah, it was a playoff game. It was crazy. It was, we played them in a best of 7 series. There was a big rivalry between Red Deer and their team, and we had, throughout the year, there was always things happen before the game or during the game where you'd have the benches would empty. It was crazy. And but that was the way game was played back then. And then we ended up playing him in a best of 7 series in the first round. And there was 3 games of the first 6 where there was pregame brawls. And then in game 7, you pretty well knew it was going to happen. But back then, the game, when you went out for warm up, everybody skated, both teams skated around the full rink of the ice. And there's not like, and really that's what, and people look back, but that the next year, I think it was the next year, they decided to do warm-ups in half ice. And if the puck went over the red line, you couldn't go get it. And so it was crazy, but how things changed. But in game 7, we end up having this full big brawl. And back then there was the rosters of 19, and they end up with 21 or 22 players on the ice during the brawl. And so anyway, it was crazy. I've always had a lot of respect for the teams that Doug had. They played hard, they competed, but we had the same thing in Red Deer. And I always obviously a lot of respect for Mark, and we had, I had an opportunity to play with him in different international events like the Canada Cup, and Austin individual, obviously a great leader. And but game 7, we get done that game, we lose 4-3. So we lose the series. We come back to Red Deer, and we had a guy on our team that was married, and he was 20 years old, and he built a house in Red Deer with his wife, and they had a little girl. And so he got home, and we decided that's where the party was going to be. Well, we partied there for 2 days, and on halfway through day 2, we get a call from John Chapman, our coach, Chappie. He says, oh, by the way, guys, we're going back to St. Albert tomorrow night to play game 8. We're like, what? And he goes, we won the protest. He says we protested the game because they had all these guys come out during the brawl, and they had too many players come out for warm-up. So we end up winning the protest and going back there and playing game 8. And we end up losing that 4-3 too. So
that's insane.
Oh, it's crazy. Like when you look back on it, it's unbelievable how that all materialized.
Can I ask you a question? There's another story. Again, there's so many stories that I'm hearing over the years that I've heard, and I have to wonder, fact or fiction. I heard about the Black Wednesday brawl. This is when you played junior with the twins, yeah. Ron and Richie in Red Deer, the Rustlers. You were playing against St. Albert.
Yeah.
And if this story is true, your teams got dressed, went out for the warm-ups without gloves or sticks, just with the specific intent, because everybody knew the brawls were going to happen. Did that really happen?
Correct. It's fact. We went on the ice. We knew going in that this was going to happen. That year our team was, we had a rivalry, obviously the history of St. Albert and Red Deer, but we were a dominant team, and we lost 9 games all that year. We ended up winning Canada. Yeah, we knew, and we had a big team. Like our smallest defenseman was 5'10", 215. And, we had guys that were 6'4", 230. Like we were a heck of a team. Like we could have competed and beat a lot of teams in the Western Hockey League at that point in time. Like we were a really good team. And you think about it, over the next 2 years, 3 years, we had 4 first-round draft picks in the NHL off that team playing junior A hockey. Myself, brothers Ronnie and Richie, and Randy Moeller. So we went in there. And we played. It was a game that was played through the regular season, and it happened. And it went into the stands. It went into the off the ice, into the foyer. It was crazy. And we all had our skates on, and they shut the lights off and told everyone to get back in their dressing rooms. They had all the fans leave. Everyone the police all came. There was police everywhere. And I'll never forget this. The officer walked into our dressing room and said, there will be no charges laid against anybody if you guys get your skates off, throw them in your bag, throw your clothes in your bag, and get on your bus now and head back to Red Deer. So we did. So here we're all walking out of the rink, and we get on the bus. We still got our equipment on. And Mom and Dad were coming down to the game, and they pulled in the parking lot, and they walked up they see us all walking back on the bus with their equipment on. And they're just like, oh my God. And Dad and Mom come up to the bus, and all Dad says, he looks at us and said, you assholes. And he turned around, walked back to the car, and they drove back to Viking. So yeah, they didn't even talk to us. They said, that's all he said, you assholes. And he turned around, they walked back into the car, and they drove back to Viking. So
Was that when Doug Messier, Mark Messier's dad, who was the coach, got suspended for life? Is that what that happened?
Yeah, we had it happened on the middle. Basically happened at center ice. Doug and Terry Sexsmith, who was our trainer, they fought at center ice, and yeah, you know what? And I don't know if that was all of it. I mean, I didn't think it would, to be quite honest. And it just so happened John Chapman, our coach, Chappie, got suspended from the game before for 12 games because he chased the ref around the ice after the game. And so we were fortunate our coach was coming back in 12 games, but our general manager, because he was coaching the team, he happened to hide under the bench while the whole brawl was on because he didn't want anything to do with it. And that's a true story. He did not. He went under the bench, and Doug was probably hunting him down and couldn't find him. Right. So he hid under the bench. Terry Sexsmith, who played in the actually played back in the East Coast League back then. Yeah, was that the lowest league at pro? I'm not sure as far as, and it was a tough league. And he got suspended from life from that league for the shenanigans he did. And he's our head trainer. So it was, yeah. And, and I, to be quite honest, I have a lot of respect for Doug and Messier family and stuff like that. And, obviously highly competitive. And I didn't, to be quite honest, I thought Doug got a raw end of the deal there. I really did. When you look back on it, why was he the only one that happened to, right? So I didn't think it was a fair outcome, obviously, in that situation.
It's a movie. So you should sell this. This is like the movie rights from this would be a freaking fortune.
Well, Mark and I could do it together. We could tell all the stories between Red Deer and St. Albert. Yeah.
The incredible thing is, from those humble beginnings, from that incredible, truth is stranger than fiction story. I love asking you these questions because now I find out that they're all actually true stories, not fictitious. You ended up playing over 1,100 games in the NHL. You ended up being a first-round draft pick, 17th overall by the New York Islanders in the 1980 NHL draft, and you ended up being on your brother Dwayne's team at that point. If you could do me a favor and just remember to kind of lean forward so we can see your face better, that would be
okay.
Great.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, Brent. Yeah. So in that year, you're now drafted onto a team where there's kind of thoughts in your mind where you say, I want to get drafted on a good team so I have a chance to win, but I want to get drafted on a bad team so I have a chance to play, because that's always an interesting combination. Now you're drafted in a first round on a team that's just won 2 Stanley Cups and still one of the best favorites to continue to win. What was that like for you when you knew you were going to the New York Islanders and you were going to get a chance to play with your brother Dwayne?
Well, in that year, obviously it was my 7-year-old season in Red Deer playing junior A hockey. And I was actually the first player that got drafted out of junior A hockey into the National Hockey League. And it was myself that year. And then after I got picked, a player by the name of Rick Wilson had got drafted from down east into the National Hockey League. But I didn't think, I really thought I was getting drafted by the Rangers or the Flames. I never ever spoke to the Islanders the whole winter, but I went out for lunches, went out for dinners with Flame Scout Ian McKenzie and Mr. Jankowski. Lou Jankowski was a scout for the Rangers, and I went out for dinner and lunches with him all winter. So I really thought it was one of those two teams. So the day of the draft, I had it. Back then you didn't go to the draft, and I was actually working for Northwestern Utilities Gas Company, and I was in the backyard actually welding up gates. Texas gates are called, and they're gates that go in the ground on entrances into lease roads, gas lease roads, and you drive over them. They're steel pipe gates, and I'm out there welding, and our boss, Lynn Josephson, comes out about 10:30 and comes out and says, "Hey, you're wanted on the phone in my office." And I was like, oh, and he says, yeah, he says, I'm not sure who it was. He already knew because Mr. Torrey had already told him. And so I walked into Len, and Len closed the door after I walked in the room, and I answered the phone. It was Mr. Torrey, Bob Torrey or Bill Torrey from,
Bill.
Bill Torrey from the Islanders, and Mr. Bowtie. And he called and said, hey, we selected you the 17th pick overall with the, by the Islanders. And the year before, Dwayne got drafted by the Islanders with the 17th pick. So it was both years, we're both taking 17th. And I was like, wow. I mean, I just finished watching these guys playing in the Stanley Cup finals against the Philadelphia Flyers, and here I'm being drafted by him. So it was a pretty cool experience. Yeah.
And you step into a situation where two-time Stanley Cup champion, one of the greatest coaches of all time, Al Arbour, which I'm sure that was a learning curve. There's a story about you making some defensive mistake in the series against the Rangers, and you got a talking to from Al Arbour, but then he puts you back into the lineup against the Vancouver Canucks, and you replace Brian Trottier. Brian Trottier, the legend. Coach calls Trotz off the ice, sends you on the ice to take an offensive zone face-off on a power play. You guys scored, and then it completely changed your future in those playoffs. Tell us about that.
Well, I go into the Islanders. They call me up as a 19-year-old on January 4th of my 19-year-old season. The 18-year-old season, I went back and played in Lethbridge in the Western Hockey League. And then I went to training camp, and I had a really good camp. I actually led the team in scoring through training camp, played in every exhibition game. And then when that was over, Mr. Torrey called me in, and Al, and they said, hey, listen, we want to be loyal to the group that's 2 Stanley Cups. And I was actually with them during the second Stanley Cup, but I never played in games. I practiced with them and everything like that. I'm one of those black ace type players, but I actually got to practice with the big group. And so I went back, and then on January 4th, I got called. Well, actually that year, the World Juniors was being played in North Dakota. And Dave King called me on the 1st of December and said, hey, we're inviting you to the World Juniors team, and we want you to be our captain. And so I thought, oh, this is awesome. So I get to go to Team Canada and play. And then I got a call from Mr. Torrey saying, hey, I don't think we're going to want you to go. And he said, we want to call you up on December 21st. We play in Detroit. And December 22nd, we play it back home against Winnipeg. We're going to fly you back home to have Christmas with your mom and dad. And it'll be the last Christmas you have at home for a long time. And then we're going to call you up for good on January 4th. So Lethbridge, John Chapman, our coach, knew that pretty well too, the whole story. So I got called up January 4th, go there, and played 40 games, had 20 goals or 21 goals, had 40 points in 40 games, led the team in penalty minutes. It was crazy. The regular season, it's like beyond imagination that you could go into that from junior to the National Hockey League, and you're getting a point a game in mid-season. And then we got into the first round of playoffs against the Rangers. And I was carrying the puck out of my end. It was game 1. And at that time, it's a best of 5 series, not a best of 7. And I tried to beat, and this guy, Rob McClanahan, remember he played for the U.S. national team? And I was the last guy, and I knew better. And I was the last guy coming to the zone with the puck. And I tried to beat him 1-on-1. I lost the puck. And Rob went in and scored and that was the game-winning goal. Well, then I end up playing 4th line. I was like the 11th. At that time, you only dressed 11 forwards. I ended up being the 11th forward for the rest of that series and the rest of the next 2 series. And back then, those 10th and 11th forwards, they were tough guys. So here I am, 175 pounds, maybe 180, I don't know. And I'm out there playing against guys that are 210, 220, and they're just out there for one reason. So it was a really wake-up call for me. I learned a lot through that process. And then we got in the Stanley Cup finals. There was game 2 on Long Island. Puck in the second period. And actually, no, not second period, third period. The score was at that time, I believe it was 5-1 or something. I forget what it was. And we had a power play. And I dressed every game, but I get 4 shifts a game maybe. And then had a power play. And Al comes down, taps me on the shoulder and says, "Go take Trotz off the ice." And I turned around and looked down like, "Are you serious? Like, I played like 1 shift tonight." Like, he says, "Go take him off the ice." So, and we were up 5-1. So I went and I tapped Trotz on the pads. He taps me in the pads. He goes to the bench. I go and take the face off. We end up scoring. Win the draw. We end up scoring. And then there was about 12 minutes left to go in the game. And then, of course, you've got a lead like that, and Al's not going to play as star players. So I end up playing a lot the rest of the game. And then we go into Vancouver, and he didn't take me off the ice. I played a ton in game 3, and he played a ton in game 4. We end up winning the Stanley Cup, and we're in the dressing room celebrating after winning. And Ron Waski, our medical trainer, comes in and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, Brent, Radar wants to see you outside the dressing room." Of course, that's Al's nickname.
Yep.
I'm like, "What? Like, we just won the Stanley Cup. We're in here. Like, what does the coach want to talk to me about now?" Right? So I walk out, and he's standing there, and Al's got big, broad shoulders, and standing there, and I walk over to him. He's underneath the stands at Pacific Coliseum outside the dressing room. I'll never forget. Every time I went back there and played after, I never, ever forgot that spot right there, right where this happened. He looked up and he grabbed me around my collar and was kind of choking me. And nowadays you go to prison for that, right? So, and he grabbed me and he held me and he goes, "What did you learn from this?" And I'm like, I didn't even know what to say. I was like, I don't know, like how to, be a champion, how to win. He goes, "No, I just made you the most mentally toughest player in the National Hockey League, and you're going to have a long career, son. Get back in there with your teammates and celebrate." And I was like, wow. And, and from that point on, I thought about that a lot that summer, what he told me, and the experience I went through, and even as my career, if things weren't going exactly the way you wanted to go as far as your play and stuff like that, I'd always go back to that point and think back to what he told me, and it'd get you through, right? So he became like a dad to me. Al did, like a second dad. Like he treated me like his own son, like after. And he never ever raised his voice, or ever after that. He never, whenever we talked, it was just like you and I are talking. And it got to the point where he was my nickname to him was Shithead. So he on the bench, he would say, "Hey, Shithead, your line's up." So that was my nickname to Al, was Shithead. So he'd go, "Hey, Shithead, your line's up." And so everyone looked like, well, I guess that's Brent's nickname, is Shithead. So that's that. But we had a great relationship. When I got traded from Long Island to Chicago, he had that was a tough day for him and I. And but he's, to me, the 2 coaches in my life that were long lasting. I had them for a long time, obviously, and I played for a lot of great coaches with Daryl and Craig Hartsburg and guys like that, Mike Keenan in Canada Cups, and Glenn Sather in Canada Cups. But when you're coached by someone for 9 years, you form a great relationship there, and you have it's something that is very, I guess, touching. And even becoming a coach, you learn something from everybody. But the stuff that Al did, I always look back, and the way he got the most out of his players was actually an phenomenal way. He had so much respect for everybody in the dressing room. And he respected everybody in their own way. He knew how to push the right buttons.
And then after you win that first Stanley Cup, it's amazing the relationship you had with Arbour. After you win that first Stanley Cup, now you go back to the Cup final. Now you're facing Gretzky, and everybody's thought, like, there's no way the Islanders are going to make this 4 in a row. Now they're facing Gretzky, Messier, Coffey, Glenn Anderson, Grant Fuhrer, and you guys did it again. You win your second Stanley Cup against that incredible team that will go on to win multiple Stanley Cups of their own. They ultimately ended your streak, but you made it 4 in a row for the organization, 2 in a row for you, your first 2 seasons in the NHL. And then you had an opportunity to not play against these guys, but play with them at the Canada Cup. International hockey has always been hugely important to you.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of underestimated your talent because, again, fact or fiction, what was your reaction when you got the call about the fact that you were making Canada Cup? How did that conversation go in terms of the shock and disbelief that you were experiencing when you heard you are now going to play with some of the greatest legends of all time representing Canada?
Well, they had already named their team, and they'd gone down to Montreal to start, and they named 30 players. Brother Brian was one of the 30, and I happened, we lived in the same town, Sylvan Lake, and so Brian and I trained together. He wanted me to train with him so I can get him ready for the Canada Cup. And of course, I always took a lot of pride in training, even though that might not have been the case back in the day, but and making sure I was in really good shape when I went to camp. And so Brian and I trained hard so he could be ready to go in August. And they named the 30 guys, and they went there, and Trotch ended up not going. Trotch ended up using his treaty card where you could choose whatever country, you're a citizen, whatever country. And he ended up staying and playing for the US team. And so they need another player. And I happened to be the guy they called, and Alan Eagleson called me at 10 o'clock in the morning and called and says, "Hey, Brent, Alan Eagleson here. I'm calling to invite you to the Canada Cup training camp." And I said, "F you," and hung the phone up. I thought someone was just joking, right? Like, I didn't think this was serious. And then Bill calls me, Mr. Torrey calls me like 5 minutes later and says, "Hey, Brent, that was Alan Eagleson. You are invited, and you got a flight out today at 6 o'clock at supper time. You got to get to Montreal." So I was like, oh my God. So I quickly packed, and my wife helped me get packed up, and Connie, and the way I took off and went there. And it was very, I was like, kind of like, you're flying there and you're sitting in the airplane and you're going, oh my God, like, I'm going to train with the top 29 players in our country that are playing in the National Hockey League. And then it kind of hit me, right? And then when you get there, you're, the first day on the ice, you're obviously, you don't want to disappoint. And I got there and I was like, hey man, I can play with these guys. But the thing that I'll never forget, and this happened, Kevin Lowe was the first exhibition game, and Kevin Lowe and I jumped into a cab going to the game from the hotel. And Kevin says to me, and of course we had the it was the rivalry and stuff between the Rangers and Islanders and stuff like that. And but I never, obviously I always respected the Edmonton Oilers and the talent and type of players they had. So and I knew Mess from playing against them. And in a way, I was pretty nervous. And Kevin says to me, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm doing okay." He says, "You a little nervous?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I am too." He said, "But Brent, you wouldn't be here if you weren't a great player." And he said, "Just go out and be you and play your game." And he says, "That's all Slats is going to want from you." And he said, "I'm telling you, you do that. Hey, we know it. We played against you, everything like that, Stanley Cups and stuff. And you're going to do well." So, and I went there and I ended up making the team, and down to 22 players, and I was one of 22 guys.
Crazy. Amazing the stuff you accomplished. And then you mentioned you went on to the Blackhawks and you went on to coach as well. and then in your retirement. And the story I find kind of mind-boggling. All the stuff that you did, the tremendous success you did, over 1,100 games, and yet financially it wasn't there for you. When you retired, you went and bought the Red Deer Rebels, and in order to be able to finance that, you had to mortgage your farm and had to take out a big loan to be able to make that happen. It was the highest fee ever at that point to get a junior team at that point. And I remember you telling us in the media, I'm going to win the Memorial Cup within 3 years. And it's like, dude, it's the hardest cup in all of hockey to win. It's harder to win than the Stanley Cup because there's over 100 teams that are competing for it and the chance to do it. But you did it. You did it in 2 years.
Yeah.
Which was amazing to me. And now you're the owner, general manager, coach. I mean, you've gone through it all with that organization. How important was it to you to have success like that at the junior level and also really give back to the community where it all really began for you?
Well, when I was getting near probably about in the mid, I don't know, I always had the thing, I guess, in the 90s that when I'm done playing, and because the best advice I got was from Bobby Nystrom, and I'll never forget this. It was after I played my fourth game in Long Island, and we're sitting in our practice rink, and Bobby Nice asked me, he said, "How long do you think you're going to play this game for?" And I'm like, I don't know. I wasn't sure, right? And you're saying, well, I don't know. And he says, well, let me give you some advice. You start preparing when you're done the game today, because you never know how long it's going to last for. And so I never forgot that. And so, I was fortunate enough along the way to obviously win championships and stuff, but have good people outside the game that helped me with certain things, whether it's financially or whatever. And I made a decision in early 90s, my wife and I, that we'd move back to Sylvan Lake, their hometown. I was going to buy some land, and I was going to run a ranch, a cow-calf operation stuff. So that's what we did. And when I quit playing, and I stepped away in April '98, I actually had a meeting with the Blackhawks, and they wanted me to stay and be the head coach, because they let Craig Hartsburg go at that time. And they asked if I would stay and become the head coach. And I told them no. I didn't think it was fair to the players, my teammates. It wasn't fair to me. It was setting everybody up to fail. I said, no. I said, if I'm going to coach at some point, I need to get home. I need to get back. I want to take a little bit of time away from the game and then make a decision whether I'd want to get into coaching or not. So I came home, we came home with the kids, and it was November, and I got a call from Terry Simpson. Wayne and Terry owned the Rebels at that point in time. They'd been in the city for 7 years. And when the franchise first started up in 92, and he asked me if I'd come in and help out the centermen and stuff like that, or maybe help himself and Peter Anholt, the assistant coach, a little bit on the coaching side. And I said, sure. So I started doing a little bit of that. And then in January, he asked me if I want to go to the All-Star game in Lethbridge and watch the game. I said, sure. So we were driving down there, and he said to me, you think you'd have any interest in buying the hockey team? And I'm like, oh, I didn't really know it was for sale. And he said, well, if we found the right person, this is what we'd want for it, and we'd certainly sell it. So on the way back, I thought about it through that whole game. That game was kind of a blur to me. And then I thought about the whole game. And then on the way home, I said to Terry, well, you talk to Wayne, and I want to see the books. So we did that. They opened the books up. I got a couple of accountants, a couple of lawyers, and we spent about 2.5 months going through everything. And we put a 10-year plan in place to that. And that time was the highest paid franchise in junior hockey for $3.2 million. And of course, I didn't make that kind of money. So I had to borrow it all. I borrowed it all actually at the Bank of Montreal. And I put down everything that I owned as collateral on that loan. Everything. Our home, our farm, machinery, you name it. Everything was put down on that just so I could get the money. And you're right. We did have that. And we did have a big press conference here in Red Deer when the ownership changed hands. And after being around that group of players and seeing the league that year, I had a really good feel what needed to be done to be competitive and be at a high level. And I knew the players that Carter Sears was their head scout at the time, and Wayne Simpson, who was the owner and GM, was a great scout too. They had some great young players coming in, and I don't know. I said it. I said, hey, the question got asked. I said, my goal is that we want to win the Memorial Cup within 3 years, and we end up winning in the second year with 3 players that were on the team from when I first bought it. And that's how that was the change in turnover. And I guess the rest is history. And then we went to the finals 3 years in a row after that. Yeah.
You're a freaking legend, man. It's amazing to me. I mean, you were vastly underpaid during your NHL career. And I'm so happy now because, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm going to guess you've made way more with this junior team than you ever did playing in the NHL. And you deserve every penny of it, my friend. You deserve every penny.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
I'm so happy. Listen, you've been amazing, Brent, sharing all this time with us. And before we go, I want to play 5 fast facts. Will you play 5 fast facts with me?
Absolutely.
I'll ask you a quick question. You give me a quick answer. Give me the first thing that comes to your mind when you do this, okay?
Yeah.
Time now for 5 fast facts with Brent Sutter. Best teammate that you ever played with. Who was that?
Oh, I played with some great ones. I could never say one guy. I just wouldn't do that. It's disrespectful. I just think every player I played with was a great teammate.
I think this one's easy. Who was the best coach you ever played for?
Arbour.
Who did you hate playing against the most and why?
You know what? I think Gretz and Mario, because I always had to check them, and I always played against them whenever we played them. And obviously their talent and type play the greatest players that ever played the game, right? So, and you just didn't want to embarrass yourself, so you tried to do the best you could against them.
You didn't embarrass yourself. You had a lot of success against them. What was your favorite NHL city to play in?
As far as probably LA at the time, but as far as excitement and all the shenanigans that went on, the Rangers, Madison Square Gardens, New York.
I think this last question is pretty easy, but I'll ask it anyway. If you hadn't become an NHL player, what career do you think you would have had instead?
Well, I probably would have ended up being a rancher and be broke.
Hey, listen, I know a rancher who's not broke, eldest of the Sutter brothers, Gary, and he's done okay.
Yeah, no, they're all doing good.
Brent, it's been amazing catching up with you. Thank you so much for sharing all these amazing stories. It's been so much fun. I'm glad things are going so well for you. And thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you for these great stories.
No, thank you for having me, bud. So it's great to see you again. So cheers.
Cheers. 2-time Stanley Cup champion, 3-time Canada Cup champ, 2-time World Junior head coach, gold medalist, Brent Sutter, a legend. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven and Athletes Care. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee, fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven pizza and wings, pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread from the 7 Now app. And Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for pickup 24/7. Athletes Care is proud to be celebrating its 25th year, offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athletes Care Sports Medicine Clinics, with 24 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and Ottawa. Hey, if you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. As well, please check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at O-Time Podcast. Until next week, I'm Gino Retta, saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.